Welcome to What's What with Heather Harris, the podcast for the fiercely hopeful. Here, we explore the lesser-known innovations, overlooked ideas, and hidden forces quietly shaping our human experience. I'm your host, Heather Harris. Let's find out what's what. Welcome to What's What with Heather Harris. I am so glad you're here for the very first episode of what I hope you will find is a fiercely hopeful production. Today, we're diving headlong into one of humanity's oldest obsessions, the end of the world. But instead of treating apocalypse as a curtain call, we'll explore it as a kind of mirror, one that reflects back to us what we most value, what we most fear, and what we dare to hope for in our digital age. From the Book of Revelation to the Mayan calendar, from Ragnarok to nuclear war drills, we've long been mesmerized by ruinous endings to life as we know it. Ancient traditions didn't always frame them as sheer catastrophe, though. Apocalypse literally means unveiling, a revelation, a cosmic reset that opens up possibilities for rebirth. It's a story structure that has shaped cultures for thousands of years, and it still grips us today. In the Cold War era, it was mushroom clouds and nuclear winter that haunted our collective imagination. Think of the 1983 film The Day After. Fast forward to present day, and the imagery has shifted. Whether it's climate collapse, artificial intelligence, or pandemic fallout, the apocalypse continues to shapeshift. The HBO series The Last of Us recently had me captivated. Its haunting visuals of cities consumed by nature and human life reduced to fragments feel like shorthand for our modern dread of societal collapse. This isn't just art reflecting fear, though. Some of us believe that the apocalypse is nigh. According to the Pew Research Center, about 4 in 10 American adults think we're actually living in the end times, whether that conviction comes from religious prophecy, climate anxiety, or political polarization. But here's the question I want us to sit with today. What if we reframed the apocalypse? What if it wasn't the last chapter, but instead a pivot point? Because imagined endings can also spark reimagined beginnings. Sometimes looking into the abyss is exactly what pushes us to find clarity, courage, and even creativity. Which brings me to my guest today, Dr. Scotty McQueen. Scotty is an adjunct faculty member in the American Studies Department at the University of Warsaw with an extraordinary academic background, PhDs in both digital media studies and performance studies, a Master of Fine Arts in Physical Theater, and a Master of Public Administration in Strategic Public Policy. His work spans art, media, policy, and performance, making him the perfect person to help us navigate this terrain. Dr. McQueen invites us to consider the apocalypse not only as collapse, but as clarity, a chance for reflection, humor, and maybe even hope. So let's get into it. Dr. McQueen, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I have been really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to talk to you too.
Okay, so let's just jump right into it. Humans have had sort of like an obsession with the apocalypse and doomsday thinking. It seems since the beginning of time. Why is this? What captures our imagination about the apocalypse?
Yeah, that is the $64,000 question, to start with a weird 1950s reference there. I think it might be helpful to give a little background on this, and then I can circle back and try to answer that, because that is a big question.
It is.
So the word apocalypse comes from the Greek word apocalypsis, or uncovering, as I'm sure you know. And in the biblical context, it's thought to be the day when truth will be revealed. So in that context, the focus is not really on the post-apocalypse. It's more of a utopian idea, really. And around the mid-1900s, people started using the term to describe the total collapse or annihilation of social structures or the environment, mainly in the context of the atom bomb. And that's when the post-apocalypse, the survivalism, became the focal point. So for popular culture, I think Orson Welles' radio broadcast of The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells in 1938 marks the beginning of, we could call it this modern apocalypse mania. And from there, it evolved in waves. Now, according to me, there are 7 major waves of this. There's the rapture, alien invasions, monsters or beasts, atomic, the plague or pandemic, artificial intelligence, and then climate. And they evolved in roughly that order, but they increasingly became sort of mixed and matched over time. So you then have giant radioactive monsters from space, or today we have the fungus zombies triggered by climate change in The Last of Us, and so on and so on and so on.
Yeah.
Now, today it's hard to consume any media, from news stories to cinematic blockbusters, without facing this whole spectrum of apocalyptic scenarios. So I'd go so far as to say not only pop culture, but it's a defining feature of the entire zeitgeist. So now circling back to the question, capturing the popular imagination. I think that if you consider that irony is one of the hallmarks of our time, then I think it's not so surprising that the apocalypse is kind of our new utopia. And we imagine the apocalypse. Yeah, there's no bureaucracy there. There's no internet, no political correctness, no taxes. It's just this fantasy of escape back to a rugged individualism and sort of farm to table frontier living. But this is a seductive feeling that this apocalypse might somehow be preferable to our current institutions of governance, and much less even that it's survivable for the vast majority of us. This is a deception. This is not the reality, right? Realistically speaking, if we are looking for ethical, compassionate, and sustainable approaches to politics and the economy, the environment, and so on, we're not likely to find these things in an apocalypse. I'm thinking of Frederick Jameson's statement here, paraphrasing a little, that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism. And so we need to be careful what we wish for.
I think that's such an amazing perspective, actually, that it's like a fantasy, a utopian fantasy that we are all maybe not acknowledging.
Yeah. And so I've written before that the apocalypse is not a thing, but a state of mind. It's a blank canvas or a Rorschach test onto which we each project our own fears and fantasies. And to kind of appropriate an old saying, we see the apocalypse not as it is or will be, but as we are.
As we are.
In addition to prepping for the apocalypse, which I'm kind of saying two things here, but it is important to prepare for our uncertain futures. But it's also helpful to remember that the apocalypse is not written in stone. AI might exterminate humanity, but it might help us clean the air in the oceans and cure disease. And a zombie fungus might mutate us, but probably won't. So I sometimes go with what John Connor says in Terminator 2 Judgment Day. There's no fate but what we make for ourselves.
Yes, there is no truer statement really than that.
So you can always find some of the answers in pop culture as well.
You can really apply that thinking back to medieval times when people were obsessed with the end of days within a religious context. That also was a reflection of who they were at that time, and that expectation of rising and finding your salvation, your own utopia in that context.
Yeah, very much. I think so. My specialty is sort of on the modern kind of secular apocalyptic threats. I'm not a religious scholar and didn't go too deeply into those ideas, but I do see through time, a lot of the same patterns emerging.
So what ignited your interest in apocalypticism?
The way that people were talking about COVID, like it was a disappointing version of a proper apocalypse. And it seemed to me that this convergence between fiction and real life was more complex than it was being given credit for. And this is what Jean Baudrillard calls hyperreality. which is when something seems to be based on reality, but actually isn't. And it starts to feel more true than actual reality. And I was already researching this sort of thing. And there was an episode of Preppers about an anti-zombie militia stockpiling weapons in Kansas. And this lady was saying, like with tears in her eyes, that if her kids or husband got infected, she would not hesitate to shoot them in the face.
I saw that episode.
Yeah. And that's disturbingly specific for a completely hypothetical, imaginary idea. Mm-hmm. And later, a family froze to death in the mountains of Colorado, where they were trying to escape the collapse of society, which they imagined was imminent in the aftermath of COVID. So that's the thing, is that prepping can be deadly also.
Yeah.
It's like Maslow's proverb about the hammer. If every problem looks like a nail, if all you have is a hammer, it's sort of like the apocalypse becomes a problem that needs more guns if you're a gun enthusiast. And it needs more bread if you like to bake things, So on a personal level, I got caught up in the whole rugged frontiersmanship of everything too. And I reread Walden and I reread Little House on the Prairie and I baked bread and the whole thing. So I was there too. And maybe just to answer the question, what I experienced during COVID, and it seemed that other people were experiencing it too, was that thinking of the pandemic in terms of a zombie apocalypse was actually an effective way to process the pandemic, because it kept things at this kind of safe, ironic distance, but still allowed people and encouraged people to take measures for their own personal safety or their families, their neighbors, and so on.
Mm-hmm. So was that the timing in your academic pursuits where you started to really explore the apocalypse and that kind of thing?
Yeah, my second PhD came as a bit of a result of the PhD lockdown, or the
COVID
lockdowns, the COVID lockdowns. Yeah. I kind of rolled my first PhD into a second PhD on the digitally mediated aspects of this topic because everything was shifting online so rapidly. And I defended my first PhD several months into my second PhD. So the whole thing was part of this like COVID craziness. But yeah, that was the timing.
So part of your studies too really looked at, and I'm not sure what you did in your first PhD, but you really examined that intersection between digital media, apocalyptic thinking, and conspiracy theories. Did your first PhD, what was the subject of that, and did they connect in some way?
They connected somewhat. My first PhD was, putting it broadly, looking at fringe sort of beliefs and belief systems through the lens of performance. So I wasn't really looking at why people believe things or what they believe. I was really studying the actions and how people perform these actions and behaviors. So it was kind of a behaviorism sort of thing. But then I was looking at how do the online ecosystems further affect and deepen these behaviors. And it's quite a complex network of issues we're dealing with.
Absolutely. You have just to be online to see how profound that influence is with conspiracy theory. I mean, during the pandemic, as we were just talking about, I remember there was one very prevalent theory about lizard people. If you had the vaccine, then you would turn into a reptilian human hybrid. People really firmly believe this. So yeah, it is very, very interconnected, isn't it?
Yeah, it's hard. I try to avoid saying what people do or don't firmly believe, because what we can definitely measure is their actions, their activities, their behaviors, what they say they believe. And they may not, people don't always really believe the things that they say they believe or they think they believe. But that's another issue.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot, but a good number of people, like multiple 2 digits of people at least, have died from reptilian based thinking. People have killed their families and so on over these things. Yeah. So it's another idea where these ideas very quickly can become toxic or deadly, certainly harmful. But I argue in my work that conspiracy theories were not actually popular on the internet during COVID. Okay, because in the sense that, as a mathematician named Wolfgang Pauli once told a colleague, your theory isn't even wrong. So what we saw on the internet during post 9/11 and onward is what I call conspiracy fantasies.
Okay.
And these are not coherent theories built upon suspicious circumstances or fabricated evidence or disinformation, as there was during the, let's call it, golden age of conspiracy theories from the 60s through the 80s, maybe, starting with the JFK assassination theories. And that particular time of conspiracy theories was very unique to its own media ecosystem. In the Atlantic, Robin Sloan writes a quote that I've used so many times, that alongside jazz and superhero comics, conspiracy theories are the third great American art form.
Oh, wow.
And
I love that.
I love that too. And with what we have today, I don't like to even give them that status. And so I call these conspiracy fantasies, which is more of a collective speculation around predetermined conclusions and outcomes. And I think of this age of conspiracism more as conspiracy fan fiction. Or even, if you know the term creepypasta, have you come across this?
No, please explain.
Okay. Creepypasta comes from something called copy pasta, which is a funny way of saying copy paste. Yeah. And it has to do with people just putting in comments in the internet sections. And the Slender Man is the most famous case of what was called creepypasta, which was kind of a horror genre version of this copy pasty stuff online.
Okay.
And so anyway, that's a long way to go. I call this stuff conspiracy pasta. It's a very similar traits to this kind of digital folklore, this online fan fiction kind of movement. But whatever we call it, I think, whether it's brought about by the wrath of God or the hubris of humanity, so by virus or vaccine, you could say, and whether these are my four categories of apocalypse now: natural or supernatural, or extraterrestrial or artificial.
Okay.
The end game of conspiracism is usually, if you follow it to the logical conclusion of these narratives, some sort of imaginary threat of an apocalypse. So this is how I think that these stories, because my original project for this, my second PhD, was on conspiracy theories. But those roads, all conspiracy theories lead to some sort of apocalyptic scenario.
So where does AI fall in all of this? Is this the artificial category you just mentioned?
Well, sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
AI, these are huge topics. I argue that all apocalyptic others, I call them, from alien invaders, zombies, sentient robots, and on, are kind of funhouse mirror reflections of humanity. These are variations on the theme less than human.
Right.
So concepts of machine sentience and, say, zombies actually bear a striking resemblance as it relates to the questions of consciousness, the moral ethics of taking life, etc.
Right.
Now, so this may be a little off topic, but within the aftermath of a devastating global pandemic, I think it's not trivial to reflect on how zombie stories, for example, suggest that it might be necessary or even exhilarating to kill our neighbors or loved ones if they become infected with a virus. And if you consider that one of the most insidious aspects of Nazi propaganda was this depiction of Jews as less than human, then I think the way that zombie movies, like most zombie movies, depict infected in these terms is actually really creepy.
Yeah.
And here's where I think there's a difference between AI and other existential threats. And that's that technology is double-edged. So it has helped us destroy the climate, but it might, if safely created, properly regulated, right, it could help us restore these things.
Yeah.
But then there's the rise of the machines idea. So machines are not yet self-aware, we could say. But
we think.
I mean, if you look at like large language models and things, they really don't know what they're doing.
No, they're just scraping content and putting it together.
So, I mean, it just doesn't seem to be the direction machines are going, actually. But that doesn't mean that this stuff we're looking at is not also really dangerous. I call this the infopocalypse. This is more of a dystopian future that is somewhat plausible that, because with AI generated text and images and deep fakes, blurring the boundaries between real and fake, on top of alternate reality information ecosystems that social media was already amplifying.
Yeah.
Then you've got this collectively created, politically expedient, then algorithmically amplified propaganda and conspiracy fantasy, disinformation, all of which is targeting our confirmation bias.
Absolutely.
Meaning, of course, like our tendency to notice what confirms our motives and opinions and ignore and fail to notice and forget all the things that challenge us or not even see them. They may not even come into our information bubble. And then you have Agent Mulder's poster on the X-Files, if you remember, with the UFO that says, "I want to believe." If we want to believe these things, then they're even more persuasive. So given its ability to escalate and amplify all other societal problems, I think this infopocalypse can be described as, I call it the one apocalypse to rule them all.
Yeah. It's a real and present danger. I mean, everything you're saying, we could pose an argument already exists.
Yeah. And that's without the robots even becoming sentient.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
I think the movie WALL-E touches on some of these topics really nice.
I love that movie.
Yeah. Yes. If we double down on technology as the solution to the problems it created, we run these risks of losing the qualities that have defined our progress this far, or accelerating the crisis. Henry David Thoreau in Walden, which was in the 1850s, he wrote that people have become tools of their tools.
Yeah.
And today I think about what does it mean to be tools of our digital tools? And I think that this is where apocalypse prepping really shines, because we need to preserve our analog ways and our embodied ways of knowing and surviving. And that's what, at least for me, that's how I tried to spin apocalypse survivalism, to tell those stories in that way.
Yeah. And going back to a point you said earlier, there is a real desire, I think, among many to return to those very basic survivalist ways, those frontier ways. You see in The Last of Us, it's like a Western frontier town and everybody's living within that community as they would have decades ago. There seems to be a fantasy for that kind of outcome as well.
Absolutely. But if you deconstruct these ideas a little, you see this is not realistic, that we're just going to go into some abandoned Walmart and have it be full of free supplies, So it really is a utopian, and I say that in the sort of negative sense, a utopian vision, apocalyptic utopianism, which is both sort of an oxymoron.
It is.
But also sort of ironically hip and cool and interesting, but dangerous and destructive if you want to be serious about breaking these ideas down. There's another idea that I contrast with apocalyptic utopianism, and maybe by the end we'll find a place to discuss apocalyptic optimism, which is
yes, I hope so.
I won't say it's the opposite idea, but it's a different approach to these things. I think a more constructive and productive approach.
Yeah, definitely. Let's circle back to that, because it is something that I have come across as well, and I think it's an interesting thing to chat about. But let's talk about now more specifically your 21-part YouTube series. It's The Art of the Apocalypse, AI to Zombie. And it's hilarious, I have to say. There are moments where I laugh right out loud. Very entertaining, but also very practical as well. There are some really practical survivalist things that people can hang on to there. So it's sort of the whole gamut. We've talked a little bit about your work, but what was your goal in producing this series?
The goal was to create a well-rounded digital merit badge-based apocalypse survival program, right? And I wanted to leverage zombies and robots as a pretext to discuss a range of topics. That was the starting point, including disaster preparedness, empowerment-based self-defense, cognitive behavioral insights and sustainable digital practices, and a few other things. And I say at the beginning of every episode that it was designed to take advantage of digital media to prepare for the collapse or ascendance of digital technologies. But what I don't say there is whether I'm trying to help viewers prepare for these things or I'm trying to help myself cope with those things, because it was definitely both for sure. And I'm not entirely sure which idea came first. I think I really was fascinated, captivated by the things myself. And then I was looking for some sort of outlet for that energy. And on the academic level, I describe it as a postmodern approach to the post-apocalypse. And I aim to deconstruct post-apocalyptic narratives in the Derridian sense, which basically means reconstructing them as ethical, data-supported, accessible educational interventions. And also entertaining, which wasn't like Derrida's emphasis, though he does emphasize at one point the importance of seriousness and laughter in political deconstructions. But I have to be careful about not going on Derrida tangents. That's a bad habit of mine.
Okay, we'll keep you on the straight and narrow there.
So this approach, I think, is very different than, just critiquing the problematic aspects of post-apocalyptic narratives, which is what a lot of people think of as deconstruction, right? Mm-hmm. And it's different than just retelling or thereby perpetuating these stories with their baggage, for better and for worse, in educational contexts. And that happens a lot in edutainment campaigns.
Yes.
Like the CDC's guide for the zombie apocalypse. There was a lot of problems and backlash. This hadn't been completely thought through in terms of all of the ramifications of combining reality and fiction. Mm-hmm. So I saw this as an exercise in storytelling, really, in considering if, and if so, how, post-apocalyptic stories, beyond providing the escapist entertainment in the face of a potentially disastrous future, because that is one thing they definitely do. Yeah. But can they also provide tools that help us avoid that future? Can they be told in a way that makes us better able as people and societies to not only cope with our uncertain futures, but also to become more resilient and ethical and compassionate in that process?
Mm-hmm. And that's actually what really was loud and clear to me, was that cultivation of resilience and community. And it was very, very, very positive, I felt, overall, and very, very practical.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to hear you say that. That's very nice of you.
Yeah, I actually learned some things. And I laughed. I laughed so often. And one of the things that really made me laugh was, and I don't know why humans are always tickled by talking about poop, but when you were talking about how to manage your poop, I laughed out loud. I'm not sure if it was because I had just watched that horrendous train wreck Netflix documentary, The Poop Cruise. Have you seen that?
Nope.
I don't recommend it. But actually your tips were quite practical. So how did you come up with the issues that you wanted to address during this series? There's baking bread, there's self-defense, there's so much going on.
Well, yeah, starting with the poop. Poop is timeless. And you have to admit, it's the elephant in the room in post-apocalypse stories. Nobody ever has to deal with that problem. But when you think about it, you say, wow, what do I do when the plumbing stops working? Mm-hmm. The starting point of this was a different project on self-defense against zombies. And this explored self-defense instruction within this absurd and gender-neutral context of a zombie apocalypse. Because I think self-defense training is very valuable, but many people find it a bit off-putting or creepy or awkward. And some martial arts cultures might still be a bit sexist or ageist or ableist and so on. And it keeps a lot of people away from that practical training, which is extremely, I advise everybody to have that sort of training. So I thought the zombie scenario could create a context that resolved a lot of those problems and might make self-defense training more fun or popular for people that aren't into that sort of thing, which would be, I think, a social good.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's the ethical thing. So it's evident from the ethical perspective that even violence against zombies, all violence has to be interrogated, contextualized. So I ended up broadening that project to encompass empowerment-based self-protection for the apocalypse, as opposed to against zombies.
Right. Okay.
It's a nuance, but it's the type of thing that commercial projects can ignore, but academic projects can't. And I think this is one of the great things about academia. And so it was because of that approach that rather than avoiding contentious issues, I was looking for opportunities to intervene in those things, like the gun violence thing, for example. You know, overwhelming statistics demonstrate that gun owners are far more likely to be murdered or have their family murdered by that weapon than that weapon used to protect them.
Yeah.
And so I had to take an unusual position for a zombie apocalypse survivalist, which is anti-gun, advocating against gun ownership and advocating for more sustainable protective actions or technologies. And from there, I expanded out to the robots and as a symbol of digital technologies, where you can think of self-defense in relation to cognitive bias and screen addiction and sedentary lifestyles and so on. So just to answer your question again at the very end of all that talking, I read a bunch of disaster preparedness guides from the 1950s, duck and cover stuff onward to contemporary day things. And there's a 1980s parody of those by Mad Magazine. It's called Meet Mr. Bomb.
I loved Mad Magazine.
Yeah, I didn't really read it much, but
did you not?
I'm familiar with it, but never got into it. But I did read this Meet Mr. Bomb issue, which had cut and lick cyanide tablets, ostensibly.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Some really funny stuff. And so ultimately, I just ended up choosing topics that I thought would be the most accessible, the most helpful for the most people. And then obviously adding coffee, because
of course,
obviously, right?
obviously. So you mentioned self-defense. You yourself are a black belt in karate. Is that correct?
That's right.
You're also a magician and a performing artist. When you watch the series, it does come through. You definitely can see these skills. But how did you bring all of that together when you were creating this series?
Magic tricks, which I've done since I was 8 years old. Magic tricks and mental magic and illusions show us how vulnerable our minds are to bias and manipulation, misinformation, and so on. Mm-hmm. And martial arts show us how vulnerable our bodies are physically to manipulation, leverage, and force, and so on. And if you combine those two approaches, you can begin to think in terms of self-defense, not only against physical threats, but against digital technologies and devices and engagement maximizing algorithms and digital disinformation and so on. And what I tried to bring to it as well was that this has to do with the idea of being a martial artist. And this term martial artist, martial arts is kind of an old translation of some older ideas, but martial artist was a term that appears to be invented by Bruce Lee in the 1970s. And it can be thought of as putting effort into not only self-protection, but protecting the people around you and in your circle of influence. And in terms of karate, which I've also loved since around 1984, I think, when the Karate Kid movie came out.
Oh, yeah. Classic.
Gishin Funakoshi is one of the key figures in the modern post-war development of Karate Do, meaning the Tao or the way of the empty hand. And he wrote 20 guiding principles for karate, and they're all very good. But number 3 was really sings to me, and that's karate stands on the side of justice. And I also practice jujitsu, or as Jigoro Kano called it, judo, the way, the Tao of pliancy. And Kano was an educator and academic in Japan, and he wrote that judo, I go a long ways with this in my writing. Judo has 3 levels of training, he says. The lower level is technical training for self-defense. And the middle level is mental and physical self-mastery. And the higher level is the application of those skills and abilities to the betterment of society.
Okay.
So a lot of people don't know these deeper philosophical levels of the martial arts. And in the project, I was really trying to incorporate and combine these philosophies of martial arts with the academic, ethical frameworks and philosophies. And what I found was these ideas are all extremely complementary.
They are. So I have to ask, and this is a little bit off topic, or maybe it isn't. I don't know. I was on your LinkedIn profile and I saw that you are an ordained minister of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. Did I get that right?
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Is this a belief system that is infused in your work? Tell me about this. I have to know.
That's a complex question.
Okay.
Because we're doing audio for one thing. And when you say belief system, you have to really do the finger quotes around beliefs.
Okay. Yes.
What I really do believe in is the separation of church and state.
Yeah.
And I believe in satire as opposed to angry rants or emotional attacks. And what I think the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster did very well was to say in the early 2000s, if you're going to teach creationism in our school district, we think that's great because by the same logic, that means you also need to teach the gospel of the flying spaghetti monster. And if you're going to give special rights or funding to groups who believe in certain things, we think that's great because we believe in certain things and we want special rights and we want funding. And so I found it to be a very interesting deconstruction, really, of these ideas, interesting intervention. And my favorite part of the Flying Spaghetti Monster religion is, which you would call a new religious movement, I suppose. It's called Holiday. The holiday of the Flying Spaghetti Monster is called Holiday, and you can celebrate it on any time that you need an official religious holiday for some reason. And so it's got lots of great flexible ideas like that.
I love that. I think we should adopt it. I'm in.
There are some problematic things in the so-called gospel, which is the book about it.
Okay.
Like there's a beer volcano and there's strippers in the afterlife and things like this. Though some people say that should be interpreted as paint strippers and not physical strippers, but
not human strippers. I like the beer volcano.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's some debate even about how good beer would be coming out of a volcano, but
this is true. This is true.
Like any religion, there are its problematic aspects, and I wouldn't endorse everything about it. But the 8 commandments are actually called "I'd really rather you didn't," and I think everybody would benefit from at least looking those up online.
Okay. Can you give me a sample?
Yeah. The first one is something like, I'd really rather you didn't act like a sanctimonious, holier than thou ass when describing my noodly goodness. And it goes on from there. If you don't believe in me, that's okay. Really, I don't care. And this isn't about them, so don't change the subject. It's something like that. They're very practical.
Hilarious. Okay, very practical.
But speaking of practical, though, one of the reasons I got ordained was because during COVID, and it's not like I had to take a test or anything, it's but I did fill out the online form and make the transaction because I couldn't get a street performer's permit during COVID in Dublin. And I was out there doing my unconspiracy manifesto as crazy conspiracy dude. And there are no laws that prohibit proselytizing in public spaces, provided it's not harassment or hate speech or so on. So I did this partly just in case I had any trouble with the law that I could claim some sort of religious protection. And I later learned that Jediism is a much bigger new religious movement on the censuses all over the world. The Star Wars thing, right?
Of course.
A big deal. The Jedi census phenomenon it's a big deal since since around 2016, I think.
I had no idea.
I thought about, I should switch to Jediism because of the martial arts thing. It's a really good alignment.
Yeah.
But then that ends up being a religion owned by a mega corporation in a way. So, which is Disney. Yeah.
Yes, of course.
And So I ended up saying, I paid my $45 for this spaghetti monster. I think I'll stick with it.
You're going to stick with it. You're going to stick with that. It's hilarious. So let's circle back now, if we can, to apocalyptic optimism.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Tell me what that term means to you.
I think that preparing for an apocalypse, if we do it ethically and rigorously, that's the thing. Mm-hmm. It prepares us for everyday life. And the problems arise when we do it in ways that are untethered from objective reality.
Yes.
So if an apocalypse or dystopia does arrive, or if our institutions collapse or corrupt irredeemably, which I'm hoping is not the case right now, then there is an opportunity for more ethical, more just, more sustainable systems to emerge. But this outcome will not be the result of blind luck, Like we have to put forth some purposeful and concerted effort. So that's what I begin to think of as apocalyptic optimism, which basically says the stories we tell are vital. And we need hopeful stories. What's the point polishing the brass on the Titanic if it's all going down, man? Like Tyler Durden says in Fight Club. So the stories have to be hopeful in a way that helps us imagine better futures, better versions of ourselves and each other. There are trade-offs here. Too much optimism about the apocalypse is not good. We are best off avoiding it if possible.
I would agree.
And too much optimism about technology is risky because it can be used to convince people everything's fine. Technologies will solve this. The markets will correct this.
Right.
So this is similar now to what Henry Jenkins, who's one of my favorite academics on digital stuff. Henry Jenkins calls this civic imagination. And he says, to change the world, we need to be able to imagine what a better world might look like.
Right.
We need to be able to see ourselves as agents capable of making changes in democratic cultures. So storytelling is not the entirety of any solution, but it's super functional starting point. It's unlimited resource. It's freely available right here, right now.
Yeah. And we're all agents in that storytelling.
Yeah. And we won't prevent the apocalypse by worrying about it.
Exactly.
So we have to focus our energy on achievable actions that have a positive impact on people, animals, and the environment around us. And the more our spheres of influence expand, the greater our influence can become. I think the challenge of prepping is not to try to hoard more supplies than your neighbor, but it's really to cultivate positive values and then bring your actions in alignment with those values. And then we can work collectively to, if I can say this, build a better apocalypse.
Build a better apocalypse. There's the sunny side right there, Dr. McQueen.
An ethical, sustainable apocalypse.
Yeah. Well, this has been such a fun and fascinating conversation. So tell me, how can my listeners find you, follow you?
I'm not the best at this sort of online presence, but if you search for The Art of the Apocalypse from AI to Zombie, you should find all the videos on YouTube easy enough. And I would be very happy if people watched and enjoyed those.
Well, I highly recommend it. And I definitely will put a link to it in the show notes for this episode. So I think the most appropriate way to wrap things up is maybe with your motto from The Art of the Apocalypse.
Wow, it's been forever since I've said this.
Do you remember it?
Hope for the best, prepare for the apocalypse.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. McQueen.
Thank you, Heather. A real pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you for joining me on What's What with Heather Harris. If you enjoyed this conversation, please follow, rate, and share the show. It helps others find their way here because the more the merrier. The future is something that we influence and imagine together. I'm Heather Harris, and until next time, stay curious and stay fiercely hopeful.